All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen Smith-Duty with the New York Stem Cell Foundation Research Institute, and we're so excited to have you here with us today. The NICEF Research Institute is located in New York City. At NICEF, we study human stem cells to help us better understand and treat diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, and diabetes. In addition to our own research institute, we support postdocs and early career researchers based at institutions around the world through our Extramural Grants Award program. We have 3 grant awards: a postdoc fellowship award, which is open to fellows in the tri-state area, and 2 early career investigator awards, one in stem cell research and one in neuroscience. Each of these provide $1.5 million in funding over 5 years and are open to researchers around the world. I hope that many of you will consider applying when the RFAs are released in October. Please visit our website for more information. Now, on to the reason you're all here today. Welcome to the launch of our Scientific Career Development Series. We are really thrilled to be offering this research to the greater scientific community. We would love to get your feedback, so please be sure to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar. And before I pass the mic over to today's presenter, Dr. Rekha Iyer, NICEF's Associate Vice President of Scientific Outreach, I wanted to give just a few quick reminders on technical details. You're all muted right now. If you're having any problems with the webinar, please let us know in the participants chat. We welcome your questions throughout the presentation, and there are 2 ways to ask. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button, and you can type your questions there. Importantly, do not use the chat to ask questions. Make sure you use the question and answer section. You can also upvote questions that someone else has already asked by clicking the thumbs up button in the chat, in the question and answer. And last, you can raise your hand using the icon that looks like a hand. This will let us know that you'd like to ask a question out loud to the presenter, and we'll let you know when your mic is unmuted and we're ready for your question. We have quite a few people who joined us today, which is wonderful, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can. Today's seminar is being recorded, and you'll be able to find it on our website after the webinar concludes. So if you'd like to revisit any sections or share with friends, please do. We also have a number of other virtual events coming up, so be sure to check out our website for more information. Now I'm excited to introduce Dr. Rekha Iyer. Rekha, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Kristen, and thank you all for joining. Hope you're all doing well amidst all of this that's going on. As Kristen said, this is something that sort of new that we're doing. We do career development for our postdoctoral fellows that Kristen mentioned earlier, but we thought that given the circumstances of probably a lot of you are stuck at home writing papers and grants and that kind of thing, so we wanted to offer some resources for you to check out. So I'm going to start just by reviewing quickly what NICEF is about, since many of you are new to us. As Kristen said, we have a research institute here in Manhattan where we do disease research and technology. We have a global scientific community of nearly 200 innovators that we've funded through the programs Kristen mentioned. And like she said, we have new RFAs coming out in October for those of you working in stem cell research and neuroscience. We also have a strong education and outreach program, including career development like this, where we are planning a conference. We have an annual conference that we've been doing for 15 years. We do have it coming up in October. Hopefully, either in virtual or in person, it will happen, given the circumstances. And we also do a lot to support women in science and ensure that they have the tools that they need to succeed. Very briefly, because we're a very collaborative institute, I do want to point out that we have a great technology system here, fantastic engineers who've set up a fully robotic system to create induced pluripotent stem cell models of disease for research and treatments of many different diseases. And we have scientific teams dedicated to a bunch of different diseases here, as Kristen mentioned. So, if any of you are interested in checking that out or collaborating with us, we really absolutely love to collaborate internationally. And we have many, many collaborators worldwide, so we hope that you'll reach out. Okay, so as for the reason that all of you are here today, is to figure out how to write better papers. So why do we want to do this? Of course, I don't need to tell you that great papers are career makers. That's probably what the primary motivation for for all of you joining. But I think I want to point out a couple of other things to keep in mind because they'll help you to write really good papers and get them published. One is that the papers are an essential part of our scientific discourse. I mean, it is really the most precise and concrete and detailed description of the knowledge that you create as scientists in your labs. So that means that they really have to be clear and accurate. There really isn't any room for reading between the lines because the paper is all you have. If you're presenting a poster, you're doing a talk at a conference, people can always come up to you and ask you questions. You can always sort of amend things, but the papers are your sort of permanent records. So you want them to be the best representation that you can possibly have. You want to make a paper that's as easy to read as possible, a pleasure to read. As most of you will know, I mean, most papers are really terribly written. They're not really that great to read. They're kind of a pain you're slogging through. But when you do come across those papers that are actually easy to read and where the impact and importance of the work is clear, that's a paper that's more likely to be both reviewed favorably when it reaches the peer review board, to be shared with other researchers once it's published, to be cited, to have that work built on. So it really just helps you to have a greater impact in addition to just getting the word out there. So, you don't want to bore your reader, you don't want to ramble, and we'll talk about some tips for making sure that you can avoid those sort of pitfalls. So what I'm going to talk about today are in sort of 4 different major areas. One is just really how to approach writing and preparing a manuscript, including like your text and figures. I'll give some best practices and do's and don'ts that you need to do along the way. I'll next talk about how to tackle some of the most common obstacles that you might encounter and that I've seen people encounter working with people over many years on how to get their manuscripts in good shape. I'll also spend some time talking about how to navigate the world of journals. I did work for a nonprofit society that publishes 2 journals. So I got a little bit of perspective from the editor's point of view, which, I'm really eager to share with all of you because it really helped me understand this world a bit better. And finally, I'll talk about how to handle the peer review process, again, informed by some, perspective from the from working with journals and editors over the years. And finally, I'll close with some resources that we will email around afterwards to all of you who are joining here today. So when it comes to actually approaching how to write a manuscript, I think there's 3 major concepts that you want to keep in mind. And I sort of frame them as 3 C's to make it a little bit easier to remember. So one of them is centralizing, making sure that you've centralized all of your ideas, your drafts, your data, your protocols in one place. And that's, that sounds kind of obvious, and a lot of things that I say today might sound a bit obvious, but if I'm mentioning it, it's because I've seen people not do it more times than I care to count. So it's easy to forget these kinds of things when you're in the throes of sort of tossing a paper together under a deadline and whatever. So another is to make sure that you contextualize your study and how important it is for the field. That again really gets, it's easy to get caught up in the details as you're preparing a manuscript and to sort of lose the big picture, but it's really, really important to keep that in mind if you want to get it published. And finally, the third C is to make sure you're continually criticizing the way that you're formulating your claims, the way that you're phrasing them, the figures that you're showing, the data that you're showing, your conclusions, everything. And I'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail right now. So the first thing, like I said, is centralizing. And what you want to do, this also includes not only in sort of digitally or physically centralizing the things that you have, but also sort of conceptually in your own mind. As you're approaching your paper, you really want to define what are a few central findings. Like I know that, over the years you accumulate so many, but if you want things to come through clearly, you have to think, what are those really key findings that I want people to take home from my paper? Because think about the last paper you've read. You don't remember 10 or 20 things about it. You probably remember maybe 3 or 4. So what are those key 3 or 4 that you want your readers to take away? And a great way to plan this out is, of course, by your figures, have results sections and supplementary materials that correspond, sort of to each of those key findings. But by separating it out that way from the get-go, that really sets you up to make it a very clear message. One thing that really helped me during all the papers that I wrote was something that I kind of called a manuscript organization document. So just sort of one document that I kept just for me, where I kept all of my ideas about the paper, any issues that I was thinking about, other questions that I thought I might be able to answer if I came up with more data along the way. And it really served as a great reference point and almost kind of a sanity check for when I sent my paper around and, my PI would hack it to bits, my collaborators would hack it up, they would dump in a whole bunch of other stuff, and I'd be like, oh my God, what is this paper about again? I could always kind of go back and say, oh yeah, this is, what my messages are, what my findings are that I want to get out of there. It's also really easy to lose track of things that when you have missing information, missing data, missing background, that you probably need to get to at some point, but it's really important to keep track of that somewhere, because then, you don't want to think of it at some point and then further down the road have your reviewer bring it up and be like, oh yeah, I totally forgot about that, and you could have avoided it. So it just helps to think from the get-go about how you can keep all of that information in a way organized that's good for you. And it's also important to keep it in a common and accessible place, not only for when you're preparing the publication, but for when you're leaving the lab afterwards and people have to sort of make sense of what you've done. I'm sure we've all been in that position where we're trying to reconstruct something that, the former PhD student or postdoc did. And we're like, okay, what happened? Where is everything? Can't find the raw data, can't find the methods, don't know how they did statistical analysis. And it's a disaster. So you don't want that to happen to, to the people that you leave in your wake after you leave your lab. The next thing I want to talk about is contextualizing. And this kind of, this is about defining your selling points, your main findings, and sort of what is going to make a paper appealing to talk about. So what you really want to make sure you define is your motivation right up front. Why is your study worth doing? And what areas of study does it have implications for? Critical for a paper is as well the novelty. What is it that makes your study really new and distinct from other studies that have happened in the field? That is really important for convincing most editors that your paper is worth looking at. The implications are, of course, as well. Going back to your motivation, what does your study contribute to that motivation, to that problem that you address? And what does that mean for others? And finally, a really key thing to keep in mind is the scope. What is it that makes your study appropriate for the journal that you're targeting, and why should their readers be interested? So I would argue that the earlier that you pick your journal, the better, because you can tailor all of these things accordingly. You would want to think about framing your motivation in a way that is catered to the journal's mission, and to the other types of papers that you've seen them publish, because that'll just make it more appealing for them to publish it. And I would say all of these things, these four elements, need to be reflected in both your cover letter and your abstract, because those are the two most important pieces of writing that your editor will use to assess if your paper is worth sending out for review. So I want to talk a little bit more about the introduction. Again, this is something that you don't often pay so much attention to as you do the results and the conclusions, but it's incredibly important for setting the framework for the points I just defined earlier. And really the point is that nobody is going to care about what you did if they don't care about why you did it. So don't just start throwing a bunch of stuff at them about the studies that you've done, the data that you've produced. You need to set that motivation in that context. Don't just dump a textbook introduction in that's been used in your lab for ages for that topic or that field of study. Tailor it to exactly what it is you have in your study and your paper and what's new about it. And your goal really in this is to convince your audience that the problem that you're addressing is interesting. So make sure that they sufficiently understand your problem and give them adequate background to do so. And again, that's something that you're going to have to consider based on the audience of the journal that you're targeting. If you're targeting a more broad journal, a high impact journal, for example, then you can't make as many assumptions about how much the reader will know. You need to make the relevance more broadly understandable than for a specialist audience, which might be for a more specialized journal. And so for doing this, the key is providing context as to what else is going on in the field and how your work fits into all of that. Defining the questions that are still open in the field to provoke, sort of our mutual scientific curiosity and interest is a really good way to do that. But, sort of the main thing to remember is that you only want to introduce the problems that your study is going to address. Don't introduce the entire field at large. That is not what your paper is for. Only talk about what your study is going to address. And I would say, if this is, in case this is helpful, I mean, all of these points are really important for a paper, but they're also important for when you're presenting your study, your work at a talk, or you're putting together a poster or a grant application. All of these things still really apply. That contextualization is super, super important, and a lot less obvious than we often give importance to. When it comes to writing about your results, your goal is really to make the interpretation of those results as clear, as crystal clear as possible. So that means you have to say, your goal is to communicate what happened and what does it mean. So for every single result, you need to make it clear why you did that experiment, what the experiment was. The number of times I've seen things like, okay, so this is a t-SNE of something, or this is a single cell analysis of something. Is it of what? Is that RNA-seq? Is that a TAC-seq? You can do millions of things to single cells now. Be very, very, very precise. There's no room for reading between the lines because you're not there with you traveling around with your paper to answer those questions. So make it unequivocally clear. Explain exactly what the outcome was and how the audience should interpret it. Give them some interpretation, because you're not just there to very factually only narrate what you found. You need to provide the interpretation. And of course, your editors and your reviewers and your audience are free to disagree with you, but that's what they're reading your paper because they want to hear your interpretations. And so your goal here is to convince the audience of your interpretations of the data and really lead them to how you arrived at those conclusions. Again, keeping in mind that you only have, those major key findings that you want to illustrate. Don't include every single result that you have, because then you can really obscure what those main findings are. Pick the ones that support your key findings. If there are some sort of peripheral ones, you can put them in the supplement. But just, try not to keep it too cluttered. I think often the impulse is to overwhelm with data, but there is definitely a balance there. And the third C is criticizing. So like I said, you want to be able to really revise your manuscript in a way that, is going to make it a really nice and polished product. So how do you do that? Your kind of king and queen, your ruling deities of this whole thing are clarity and accuracy. You want to make sure that all of those key findings come across both clearly and correctly. So as you clarify, don't lose meaning that's critical. And sort of vice versa, and that they need to be underscored sort of both verbally and visually. Your figures need to make all of those clear too. Again, distinguishing between what your main findings and your supporting findings are by sort of, thinking about main figures and supplementary figures. It can help to, you just really kind of need to constantly reevaluate what those claims are, what those findings are, and exactly how you support them. And as you incorporate new data, which is, obviously very common as you're preparing a manuscript, you want to adjust the phrasing. You want to make sure that you're adjusting the way your conclusions are phrased, the interpretation is phrased, maybe even the way that the introduction is set up, because you have something new to offer. And finally, it's really, really important just not to be sloppy. Editors often rapidly reject a paper just because of bad grammar or typos or whatever, if there's something completely riddled with it. So this is an easy thing to avoid. Just take that extra time to make sure that things are polished and look good. Referees are people too. They like pretty things. They like nice looking figures. They like nicely written text. Just make it easy and nice for them, and make sure everything is nice and consistent. Taking that extra step can really make a big difference, and sort of not sabotage all the great work that you've done to put together a manuscript. A key point to keep in mind as well is that, writing is a process. It's not a product. It's really hard. I know it's really intimidating to try to think of like, when are you actually finished? But the point is you can always sort of iterate on things to make them better. Of course, you have to decide, along with your co-authors, sort of at what point do you sort of have a good enough product. It's really, it's non-trivial, and we can talk about that in the discussion as well. But here's sort of how I like to think about the revision process. you start with an outline. That's really, really important with all of those key findings that you defined earlier on. You then want to, fill in your data, give those precise explanations of what the data is, why you generated it, what you found, and so on. You then want to, once you've filled in the data, you want to polish and make those sentences as efficient as possible, not rambling. I'll go into that in 1 second. You want to make sure that you sort of iteratively are sharing it with your co-authors and with external reviewers. I think it's in lab meetings, for example, are a great way to present a paper and sort of have things torn down and get good feedback from people, or departmental seminars, if we have any virtual options for those, from your thesis advisors, from your friends. Sometimes friends can give you some of the most critical feedback that you'll receive as you're preparing a manuscript, which can be helpful if your friendship can withstand it. And then you kind of iterate, polish, incorporate your feedback. And this is something that, this is a cycle that's going to kind of keep going as you get more data in and so on. But what I do want to emphasize again is that as you do add more of this, sorry about that, if you add more of this data in, that you want to go back and say, like, okay, do your claims and conclusions still reflect the data? Can you maybe broaden some of your claims and conclusions, or do you need to walk them back because maybe, one of your controls wasn't as good as you thought, or you couldn't replicate something, or what have you? Just make sure that you're kind of constantly going through that iterative process. So some of the most common errors when it comes to actually writing sentences, and the art of science writing is its own thing. I'll give you guys some resources on that later on, but I did want to point out sort of the two most common pitfalls. One is those really, really overcomplicated sentences. And I know we've all seen these in papers. And a good way to think about it is, in a sentence that you read, is every single word in that sentence doing work? So here's an example. I wrote this myself, don't worry, I'm not, sort of picking on anybody specifically, but I've seen a lot of sentences like this, and I'm sure that all of you have, and these are just awful, and you want to run away when you start reading these things. There's always a simpler way to say things. I mean, your sentence might come out like this the first time, but if you go back, like, what are you really trying to get to? Don't use things like "in order to," that's just excess words. To is, gives you the same meaning. You don't really lose anything. Doing the whole design and implement, like if you've done it, you've obviously designed it, like there's, that's a little bit kind of redundant. Maybe you don't need two adjectives for something, like wide and heterogeneous, maybe you just need diverse, for example. So think about how you can, sort of condense your sentences, make them very efficient and dense, and still get the same, point across without losing any sort of accuracy. This is something that, it takes a lot of practice to do, but I would encourage all of you to do it as you, every time you sit down and write a draft, kind of go back and see, like, okay, which of these sentences can I make more efficient? What words can I cut? Another very common one is the passive voice, especially in methods sections, but even in results sections, this was done, that was done, blah was done. I mean, in addition to being much more boring to read, this is actually, it kind of obfuscates, sort of who did it. I mean, are you talking about something previously that was done that you were framing the context of the field, or is it something that you actually did, and can you phrase it in a way that shows, sort of why you did it again? So, think about how to flip those sentences around. It makes it more engaging and it makes it more accurate. So I'm going to talk about some of the more common obstacles in manuscript preparation and go through those. So one of them is kind of the issues with people. I mean, more and more our papers are becoming ultra collaborative. They're going beyond our own labs. So it's really, really important to have sort of open communication about that. I'll touch on that briefly. Data handling is another very common obstacle, and making sure you do that correctly will save you a lot of grief in the long run. And the wonderful rush to submit, whether it's because you're getting scooped or because your PI gets really, really nervous about something, or you got a vacation that you want to go on and you just want to submit your paper beforehand. Definitely been there, and that's a wonderful feeling. But it's easy to forget a lot of obvious steps when you're when you're doing that. So I'll, give you some of those, and hopefully you don't do that next time. So to touch on some of the people issues, when it comes to managing your collaborations, of course, authorship is one of those really, really contentious issues that comes up, very commonly. So, sort of as a general approach, I think it's really helpful to, at the very beginning, when you decide that you want to write a paper, decide on what your criteria are going to be for including somebody as an author, period. If it's somebody that, if they gave you a plasmid or something like that, maybe they belong in acknowledgements. Or, I think a good rule of thumb is sort of, if they've made a contribution to how the story is told, to how things are interpreted, that can be a good way. And of course, if they provide data, that's critical to your manuscript. But, there's a lot of gray area in this. It's really up to the authors. And so, it's something good to discuss with your PIs, early on, and kind of decide, what are going to be your criteria, and sort of pick those big spots. If this is something that you've been leading as your PhD or postdoc project, I mean, it might be kind of obvious that you were the one who leads it, but you need to be open to the fact that, of course, the story can take many years to publish. There might be some conflict coming up. There might be somebody from a collaborating lab who ends up contributing, just as much to the story as you, and you have to be open to the idea of giving them a co-first authorship or even a first authorship if that's the case. But it's really important to think about this sort of at the outset, and to have open conversations with your collaborators about expectations around that early, because that again can help to guide those conversations as the story evolves and you have to sort of adjust things. When it comes to co-authoring other manuscripts where maybe you're not the lead, it's really important to make sure you're aware of what words are being put in your mouth. How is your data being used? This is, you don't want to put your name on something that doesn't reflect what you think the interpretation should be. So it's good to, I'm sure we've all been in that situation where we're on this collaborative paper and we don't sort of hear about it until it's already published and somebody says, oh yeah, it's out on PubMed, congratulations, whatever. It's and people can lose track of keeping their collaborators in the loop. I think, as a lead author, it is your responsibility to make sure that you're, letting all your collaborators know when you're submitting a paper. But it can be good when you're in the collaborator position to sort of check in and, make sure you're able to review drafts before they're submitted, and, of course, help them shape the story as much as possible. So like I said, I mean, communication is really ultra important for all of this, and just keeping the lines open, having calls, having emails. We're all getting really good at this virtual stuff nowadays. So maybe that'll be one benefit of this, is that these things go a little bit better. So we can all be on the same page, making communal decisions and updates. A couple of quick points on handling your data. Again, making sure you centralize all the raw data, and so it's easy to find for everybody. Obviously, only publish your raw data once. Wish I didn't have to say that. Make sure that you're very transparent on how you analyze data. There are many different resources for doing that, because most journals nowadays are requiring, ultra clarity on how you're doing your statistical analysis and rigor and justifying your sample size. Save yourself the trouble early on by just making sure you're aware of all of that, and before your statistician leaves the lab and you have no idea how to explain it anymore when you're deep in the review process. So, don't be part of the reproducibility problem. Just make that easy. So things that get missed in the rush to submit. This is a really common one, making sure that you cite everybody who needs to be cited. Give credit to all of the studies that have really laid the groundwork for you. And not just because this is the right thing to do, but if it helps, these people are likely to be your reviewers. So they like to see if their work has been cited, and they will immediately be put in a bad mood if it is not. So that is a good motivation. Make sure that you acknowledge your contributors. This is something that we also always forget. Whether it's people who have helped you out in your lab to get something set up, someone who sent you a plasmid, your funders, very, very important. You're often contractually obligated to do that, so that's really not something you want to forget. Any facility support you've gotten, getting the affiliations right. Again, your affiliations should be where you did the work, not where you are. And again, making sure that you properly finalize things and circulate for the approval of your co-authors. Do not wait until the proof stage to do any of this, or to do like, a whole like polish situation. Again, I've seen that so many times. That is really not what the journals want you to be doing at the proof stage. You need to be doing that once you've gotten the sort of acceptance and you're submitting the final version of the manuscript. You do not want to be making substantial changes at the proof stage. When it comes to the journal side, there are some specific things that get missed. So really figuring out how long it takes to submit. It's really good to familiarize yourself with the specific journal submission system as early as you can, and making sure that all your formatting and all that stuff is right. It does take longer than you think, and it's some journals will require you to put everybody's phone number in or something. Like it's excruciating. So just be sure that you're not like, okay, I'm gonna catch a flight in like 3 hours. Maybe not nowadays, but that you have that time to submit. The formatting guidelines can be very different from journal to journal, so read those instructions for authors as soon as you choose your journal so that you know what to do the whole way. And what's really, really good to do is to have a backup plan. I hope that you guys don't have to face too many rejections in your careers, but it's really good to have a list of target journals so that as soon as you get that rejection, you don't have to sort of sit there and be like, oh God, this sucks. What do I do next? I don't know. You already have your plan and you just do it, and you can feel your feelings, sort of later on while your paper is hopefully getting reviewed in the next journal. So now I'm going to talk about navigating journals and peer review in the last 10 minutes or so here. So the topics I'm going to cover are picking some of these target journals, like how do you decide on what journals are going to be appropriate for the study that you want to publish, what those considerations are, how to look at things from the editor's point of view and really convince them that your paper is going to be worthwhile. And finally, kind of handling peer reviewers and the peer review process and nasty reviewers, which we all unfortunately have to encounter here and there. So when it comes to picking a journal, some of the factors that you want to consider, I know that there's one big factor that everybody likes to consider, and I definitely don't want to argue with that. And certainly that's a flaw in our publishing system, and that's a whole other can of worms that we're not going to get into today. But given that we have to operate within the framework of the current publishing system, what are the different factors that we can consider beyond impact factors? So one is really the fit of the journal. That's really what the primary thing you should consider is, do they publish similar papers? Where is it that you've seen similar papers published that have inspired your work, or, even that you've built on or cited in your study? That can be a really great source for figuring out what the right journals are. Making sure that there's visibility to the right communities. Some journals are really good at helping to promote your papers, and you might have seen that through social media, press releases, mainstream, whatever you have. So that can be a consideration. Knowing who the editorial board is, if they have relevant expertise, that can help. If you maybe have interacted with editors before at conferences or what have you, that can be a good sort of inroad to just, sort of write them and say like, hey, I've got this paper that I'm preparing about X. Is that something that might be of interest? That's already kind of a foot in the door to sort of help. It's of course no guarantee that you'll get a paper in, but it certainly doesn't hurt. A lot of journals are transparent about the process that they have. So, and maybe you've heard from other of your collaborators, whether the editors are good about offering more specific guidance and not just saying like, hey, just do everything the reviewers say and you'll be fine. Obviously more specifics are give you qualities of reviews, and like the editors again are helping the whole process to be as fair and constructive as it can be. Again, more journals are being transparent about the speed, sort of what their average submission to first decision is, to publication, to early online. Is it something that you want to be able to get out as sort of quickly as possible if you're in a sort of scooping situation? Looking at submission format, because again, this can be a huge pain if you're, going from one to another and you have to completely reformat things entirely. I think there was an estimate of how long this takes scientists to do, and it's really depressing and inordinate. So there are journals that are more flexible in the initial submission format, so that's something to consider, or journals that even take a bioarchive submission, and you don't have to do anything, which is really, really great. And maybe some of you might want to consider, what the publisher is if it's a society, if it's a for-profit publisher, what their business model is, what their values are. Definitely watch out for predatory journals that sort of, come up to you and, just you pay them some money and they publish whatever. There's a lot of those out there, and there are lists online that you can use to check with that. It also helps to consider, like I said, the journal's point of view, the editor's point of view. So how can you do this? What you really want to do, editors get, hundreds or thousands of papers that they have to review all the time. So, make their job easy. Show them that you know how to read their formatting guidelines. That makes them happy. Make the paper as clear and concise as you can, as we reviewed earlier, and just make it really easy to understand how awesome your work is. This really, really helps editors to make a positive decision. Make your paper stand out for them. The cover letter is ultra important for this. So in the cover letter, you want to, again, highlight why your study is really novel and important, how it stacks up against the journal's scope and criteria for acceptance. And they have all these published on their website, so they're easy to read. You can put those keywords in there. And you want to make sure that the implications of your study are extremely clear. You can make them, sort of more succinct and more pithy in the cover letter than you might in the abstract. But you have to be, make sure that you don't overstate them. And that's a really tough line to walk. I know that a lot of us have trouble with that. But if it's something where I think the clarity is most important for the editor, because they're reading so many. So when they skim a letter, they really have to see that. But you have to make sure that, your claim doesn't fall apart once it gets to the reviewers, because then, sort of what is it all for, right? When it comes to considering high impact journals specifically, high impact journals are really looking primarily for novelty, for broad interest, for a significant and a lasting impact on the field. So if you can make claims that stand up to that and that reflect that, can they stand up to scrutiny? Would you be able to get up in the middle of a departmental seminar and say that, or would you be taken down by all of the faculty in your department? That's a good way to sort of think about it. So I want to talk a little bit about the peer review in the last few minutes here. So when you get a peer review, you get two parts. So one is the decision letter, of course, from the editor. It summarizes what their decision is, so to, minor revisions, major revisions, reject. And sometimes they, hopefully, if you get a thoughtful editor, they'll give you some guidance on exactly which of the reviewer's concerns that they feel need to be addressed. And they will give you, sort of next steps and some boilerplate and whatever. And, of course, the more important thing then is to read the comments from each reviewer. The comments include what they think the paper was about. Of course, that doesn't always align with what the paper was really about. The reviewers are not necessarily going to recommend acceptance or rejection, and journal policies differ on this. I mean, I think it's always better if the editor is the one who's making that recommendation and not the reviewers, because the editor is the one who really knows what that journal is about and what they want to publish. However, you can get a sort of range of that. And the reviewers will, often be divided into those major and minor concerns. Of course, the minor ones are not, something that you're going to be held to, and they were certainly not deal breakers for your paper. But the major ones are what you really want to focus on and sort of compare that to what you see, the editor refer to in their decision letter. So how do you interpret all of this? Your sort of first pass, the questions you want to ask yourself are, what did the editor decide? What will their final decision depend on if they've not, sort of been given a final decision, or if you think there's a possibility for a rebuttal in case their final decision is reject. And you want to make sure you forward to the co-authors. It can be easy to slip into a spiral and forget to do that. And then you take a bunch of deep breaths, and then you do a second pass. Ask yourself, okay, what do the reviewers actually want? Is there some kind of a killer experiment that you've got under your belt that would address, a lot of these concerns? Is there something fundamental that they just didn't understand about your paper? That can unfortunately be common too. Have you done already some of the experiments that they've asked for? And so at this stage, it can be really helpful. Again, once you've calmed down, I know these can be charged situations, but to reach out to the editor to kind of talk it through in case you're not really clear on what it is that they expect from you in a response. So the response letter, that can be the fun part and the terrible part. And so the key thing to keep in mind is to be very, very nice. And I apologize to all the non-Lord of the Rings fans out there, but this needed to happen. You want to be as positive and upbeat and appreciative as you can, even if that's not at all how you feel about the review. It's really, really important to convey that because you need to be nice to your reviewers. They hold the fate of your paper in their hands. So this is the tone that you want to set for the review process. So you want to be nice and appreciative of all of the feedback that they've given you. You want to show that you understand exactly what is asked of you. Summarize everything at the very beginning, what the comments were, that you've used them to improve your manuscript, that you've collected new data, what have you. Be very precise on what you've done, very thorough on what you've done. Make it really easy to find your revisions. If they're minor, then coloring them in the resubmitted draft or indenting them can help. If they're major, then you definitely want to be referring to them in the response letter. Actually, in either case, you want to be referring to exactly where the changes occurred in the response letter. And you want to make sure you respond to every single comment by every single reviewer, even the minor ones. And even if you disagree, you can explain why. And I'll give you some examples of that right now. So, like I said, you want to summarize your understanding of what they've requested of you. So, in your response to the editor, we're pleased about the appreciation. We understand, that they've provided some helpful suggestions. Like, use that kind of courteous tone. The significant changes we understood to be recommended were, this and that. We agree that this is important, and so we have done X, Y, and Z. Be very, very clear and very thorough. So, when you're talking to reviewers directly, when you can start with exactly where you've made that change and, use phrasing like "we agree" and "this is a good point," and "we apologize if this was unclear," because it's very easy to blame reviewers for thinking that things are unclear and for not reading your paper properly. But in some cases, it might be because you didn't quite make it so clear because you're trying to communicate so many things at once. So, give them a break. They're reading a lot of different papers at a time. Take the high road. Be positive, even if they are really nasty reviewers and they're asking completely unreasonable things. Your goal is to get published. So, maybe write your angry review to yourself first, and then write a positive one afterwards, if that's helpful. If they have these really kind of snippy comments, just respond in as factual and sort of a respectful way as you possibly can, and don't get defensive. Don't play blames. Avoid using the word "however." I know that that's really commonly used, but it sounds like you're arguing, so it presents that sort of contrarian perspective. So you don't want to include that. So here's some other examples of what not to do. Don't go the other direction. Don't go on and on. Don't suck up. Like, people see through that. That's not really gonna help you too much. Just keep it simple. Don't go overboard. Don't insult anyone, even though this might feel really good to write. It's probably not a good idea to put out there, even if it is true that the reviewer can't read. Don't write that. So again, write one for yourself and then write one for the reviewer. And don't choose a negative response if you have something positive to say. So don't start arguing about the scope of the paper if you've actually got something to address it with, or if the editor has told you that you don't need to address it, or that kind of thing. Don't start arguing if you have something positive. Always start the response positive, because if you start off making them feel like you're arguing with them, then they're going to respond they're going to be already in a worse mood reading the rest of your response, and you want to keep them happy as much as you possibly can. So I'm going to summarize now. If you don't take anything else home from what I've said today, just remember when you're approaching writing a manuscript, You want to centralize your information, you want to contextualize your study, and you want to criticize your writing and your figures, going for clarity, for accuracy, for information density as much as you possibly can. When it comes to dealing with the journals, just keep in mind the scope of the journal, the mission of the journal, the editor's perspective, how they're going to be perceiving all these things that are coming across their desk. And peer review press, the hardest advice to follow is to stay positive and be as kind and courteous as you possibly can with it. These are some resources on manuscript publication. We will circulate these around to everybody after this in the follow-up email, but I do want to really point out the book On Writing Well, which really helped me as I was learning to do scientific writing to avoid the whole making sure that every word is doing work. That is a really, really critical lesson for me. So I hope this was helpful. Really looking forward to hearing everybody's questions and discussion.
Great, thanks so much, Reka. We have one question here from Kostas. The question is, when do you think that it's okay to send a reminder to an editor regarding a paper that's been under revision?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would do that according to sort of how the editor has set your expectations around revision. Sometimes the journal will publish, again, like I said, sort of their typical time from submission to first decision. Sometimes the editor will come along, will communicate that in your response letter that you can, or in the submission letter that you can expect to receive a response by such and such a time. I mean, kind of a good rule of thumb maybe is if it's gone past that time point for like a couple of weeks or something like that, it can be good to sort of follow up. Rather than following up with the main scientific editor handling your paper, sometimes you'll be contacted for sort of technical things by assistant editors and that kind of thing who work directly for the journal, who are not like the academic editors, and sometimes they'll have a little bit more insight into the technical things that are going on. They might just be like, oh, sorry, one of the reviewers hasn't responded yet. And then you don't have to sort of bother the main editor whose, mood you want to keep in good shape. But yeah, I think, just, do you have any sort of an idea on when we might be able to expect a response is a good way to do it rather than, getting upset always, even though it is a very upsetting process, and I totally understand that.
Great. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question directly to Reka? All right, I see Anna Frere here. I'm going to allow you to talk. You just unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello?
Hi, Anna, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. I'm sorry, I lost internet in the middle, so I think I lost maybe the part that you approached this. I really enjoy Rika, really nice presentation. So my point is, my question would be what's your opinion in a situation, like it happened to me in my previous paper in my PhD, that one of the reviewers was not very clear in the experiment he wanted to be performed, and we think we approach his concern as best as we can, and then in the second round, he came up with a different question that he didn't come in the first round, and then we went to a third round. So it was never clear what he wanted, and we just felt he didn't really wanted the paper published. I don't know.
Yeah.
So in the end, my question will be how we deal with this situation and how we can have the editor support when we see that the concern is not going to be approached or is not a fair concern.
Yeah.
what will be your opinion on
Yeah,
that?
that's a great question, Anna, and I think it's something, you know, so many of us come up against are these, you know, sort of unfair reviewers who, you know, unfortunately it's a side effect of the anonymous part of peer review is that people will ask for unreasonable things and sort of you don't know what it is they're looking for, or maybe they're just out to sort of kill your paper because they don't like you. You'll never know, unfortunately. But I think that, you know, it's very difficult to avoid this in general, but the best resource that you have is sort of talking to the editor. So what I did recommend at the beginning is sort of once you get that initial decision letter that has the reviewer comments in it, it's always a really good idea to respond right away to the editor, not right away, but as soon as you can to the editor, and you know, just to get to clarify, you know, if we do this, and this, what is, you know, is that going to be sufficient to address the concerns, or what do you think? And sort of try to agree on a plan for going forward with the editor before, you know, you even start those experiments, so that, you know, again, those expectations are set. And I realize that's, you know, that some editors are going to be better at this than others, but you know, there are definitely those cases of editors who even encourage you to contact them with a plan for the experiments that you're going to perform and the analysis that you're going to perform. But even if they don't ask you for that, I think it's a really good idea to do that, and even set up a phone call if, you know, if that's something that they're amenable to. So just so that expectations are clear.
Great, thank you, Rika. We have another question here from Justin. If we need an extension on producing more data, given the current COVID crisis, how can we politely ask the editor?
I think that's a very timely and very reasonable thing to ask, and I hope that the editors are going to be receptive to this kind of thing. It would be unfortunate if they're not. So, you know, I think you're very much within your rights to ask that. You know, an approach could be like, if you're, I guess this is you're in the middle of a revision process, you know, I would reach out as soon as you can and just say, you know, in light of the pandemic, we've unfortunately not, you know, had as much access to our lab, you know, it's been harder to reproduce these experiments or what have you, and we're hoping for an extension. You know, honestly, they often don't really care that much about how quickly you get back to them with your revised experiments, because they have so many other papers that they can publish in the meantime. So I would say that's among the lower sorts of you know, ways you can perturb them, and again, very reasonable in the context of what's going on right now. Yeah. They're probably inundated with submissions because everybody's writing papers. So maybe they're happy to have a bit more time before they finish reviewing your paper.
Great, thank you. Another question here. Do you have any tips on how to give good feedback that is helpful but doesn't destroy the confidence of the writer? And that question's from Maria.
Thanks, Maria. I hope that when I've given you feedback, I haven't destroyed any of your confidence, and so I'm going to try to answer that. But I think, yeah, that's a really good point. And you know, I think when you're going through and you know, if you see, it's always good to reread your comments. So, you know, maybe write them first as you're passing through the document. You know, I usually use comments in Word or what have you, and I'll go back and say, okay, maybe that's a bit too brusque. Don't use 2 exclamation points on anything. That's usually a very aggressive way to give a comment, unless it's like you know, a piece of praise. But you know, don't be like, where's the reference? Question mark, question mark, question mark, like that. You know, that's a little bit aggressive. And, you know, I think just considering that, you know, we've all been there, we've all written bad papers, you know, myself included, certainly, and that's the only way you learn this kind of stuff. So just keeping in mind that people are all learning, or they have, you know, maybe they're in a rush or this and that, putting yourselves in their shoes can help you write a bit more compassionately, I think. Like, or giving examples too. I think that's one thing that's helped me, is like, you know, I found with papers that I read, it can help, you know, if you phrase things like this instead of like this. That can be a more constructive way to do it.
Great. Another question here. Anna Maria is asking about a similar paper has been published in a journal that is suitable to the study that she conducted. They addressed a similar problem with a very different model, but they had slightly different results. Do you think that they should aim for the same journal?
I mean, I think that would be, yeah, that would be a great piece of criteria for aiming for that journal. With a very different model is, you know, one consideration, it might not be a shoe-in. Like, for example, if you've, you know, if they've done something in human cells and you've done it in bacteria, you know, maybe it won't be seen as high enough impact. Unfortunately, that is part of the case. And certainly you want to consider novelty as well. If what you're showing is not going to be as novel, now that that other study has been published, then maybe that journal is not going to be as interested in publishing it. But, you know, I think that's a good sort of rule of thumb, is like, oh, I've seen other people do this, or maybe it was in a different disease or something like that. Or model system or what have you. And something else occurred to me for Maria's question too. I think when you're giving people feedback on papers, I mean, the most helpful way to do that is as if you were a reviewer yourself. Like if you got this paper for peer review. And so, you know, you can say things like, as a reviewer, I would be worried that, you know, I could foresee the criticism that, you know, this part isn't robust enough, or this isn't phrased as clearly enough, or those kinds of things. That can be really the most helpful way to do it. But yeah, you do want to play the devil's advocate as much as you can, and just sort of make clear that that's what you're doing.
Great, and we have a question here from Francesca. Do you have any suggestions about asking to exclude reviewers?
Yeah, so I think that's a really common thing, and I think that's, you know, a lot of editors really do expect that. What I would recommend is that you don't try to exclude the entire field. You keep your exclusion recommendations to maybe 2 or 3. If they see a really, really long list, then they might start to get concerned as to why you don't want these people reviewing your paper. And when you do ask for, you know, exclusions, the main reasons that they'll, you know, be willing to honor that. And again, I mean, unfortunately, you can't guarantee that they will honor it. Sometimes, you know, if there is really a small pool of people who are going to be qualified, they're going to have to call on those reviewers. Hopefully they don't, and they're able to respect your suggestion, but they're most likely to respect your suggestion if it's on the grounds of directly competing interests. You know, so like, you know, if you think that they're going to scoop you, or if you know that, you know, they've kind of been overly critical of your work before, I would still like sort of probably phrase that as directly related competing interests. You know, that's the most common sort of grounds to really be able to exclude a reviewer. Yeah, great question.
Thank you. So we have time for just one more question here. From Julia, how would you go about publishing a manuscript with data obtained during PhD after moving on to a postdoc position if the former PhD advisor, and in this case, has passed away?
Wow, that's a really good question, and I hope that's not a common one that we need to encounter, but it does definitely happen. You know, I've seen all kinds of different approaches to it. Some people do publish a paper with, you know, with sort of posthumous authors on it. That has definitely happened with, you know, several PIs that I know of in the field. And, you know, they keep the last author position sort of out of respect for the fact that, you know, they were the one who supervised and enabled most of that study. And I think, you know, really the key point on it is making sure that all of your co-authors would be on the same page about that, and on the same page about where to put that person in the author list. I mean, definitely you'd want them in the author list somewhere, but it's just a matter of sort of where. So yeah, I think it would be a decision really by you and all of the co-authors of that study. I saw another question about, you know, sort of formatting. And this is something, you know, I didn't get into this so much because, like I said, this is sort of a whole different, you know, the way that journals operate is a whole conversation and discussion in and of itself. And I completely understand the frustration with it, and I suffer from the frustration with it, you know, myself. And like I said, I really do appreciate it when journals you know, are open when it comes to submission format. And, you know, maybe they require you once you've gotten it accepted to change it to their format. But when they'll take something from bioRxiv, or they'll transfer it from other journal formats and so on, without really checking. And I think this is starting to become more and more common. So, you know, I really wish that more journals would do it. I think it would be really, really great. And I think it's, you know, it can be a pain to reformat for sure. I sympathize with that concern.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Rika. We are out of time for today. As I mentioned at the top of the webinar, we would love to get your feedback and suggestions for topics for future webinars. So please fill out the survey that you'll see right after the webinar ends. We also have more of these coming up in the future, so please be sure to check out NICEF's website to find out more about those events and all the latest news and happenings with the New York Stem Cell Foundation. I hope you all have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, and stay safe.